Okay, everybody, so we have got our nice little responsive grid thing going on here, but now we need to get some content into it. We need to get some content and we need to get some interaction going, right? So up to now we focused a lot on, how do we load data, how do we generate visualizations, we've worked on maps and charts and graphs and all kinds of things, right? And we've talked about we've addressed a couple of different methods for getting that content into our page. One is by including scripts, as I do in my line chart example here. And I will go ahead and open this up. I actually can't open this up locally. But this is going to be this version, right? So if I come to here's my dynamic chart. I think it's probably here. Right, okay, so I have a very poorly styled chart and a not very interesting map. I'm sure everything that you guys have just turned in is much, much better than this, right? But we recognize that this is not a very good looking page, and so we need to deal with how we get this content into our better laid out page, such as we see here. Okay, so what I've gone in and done is I've edited some of I didn't actually edit the text to match, but this is now 6 columns. This is one column, and 4 columns according to this layout, and they get a little bit more reasonably sized as I scale my browser window a bit. So the question is, how do I get content into these things? So the one way that we know of doing this, which we touched on last week, right, is via an iframe. So I've just opened up the HTML file that that corresponds to this page, and so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull an iframe out of it, right? And we've got all kinds of stuff because this is one of my Fusion table maps, and my goodness, this is a long iframe code, but here we are, finally, right? So keep in mind that all I've done here is we've actually just I've just hard-coded these divs onto the page. And I know that we've looked a little bit at how you can generate divs, right? So I could generate divs into here, but let's say the focus for me is my map. All I'm going to do is paste that in there. So I've got my iframe code, right? And this should work out of the box, right? Not a lot going on. I'm going to maybe I'll put some text in here that says, well, I'll put this here. So 1 of 12, 1 of 12, and this is actually, so you can see span 4 of 12, so I'm going to say 4 of 12 here, just to remind myself. Span section 1, I'm going to call 6, 1, 1, 4 layout, right? Because 6 columns, then 1, then 1, then 4. Adds up to 12. Good start. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and check this out in my browser window. Now, we see a problem right away. I've left these gray backgrounds in on purpose. Big problem is that this is running over. And it's running over because I actually have in my iframe code a width and a height hard-coded. So one of the keys of responsive design, as Chris mentioned on Friday, is using percentages rather than fixed pixel widths. Now, the biggest thing, so I just changed these both to 100%, which should send the message to the browser, look, just take up as much space as is available, and the definition of what's available is going to be handled by our 6 of 12 CSS here. And so hopefully if I reload this, I'm going to get something that looks a little bit better. And indeed I do. I'm only taking up 6 columns. I can see that actually my iframe will scale nicely. My map might not be very well suited to that size, but that I can get a responsive effect in there. Now, the other thing that I would want to look at probably is making it a bit taller. So it's less of an issue for me to, say, hard code the height. Let's say I wanted this to be, and this is an important thing, right? I can actually mix percentages and pixel definitions in my CSS. So one thing can be 100% width, and then its height can be a strict pixel height, right? And this actually looks not bad, right? I'm starting to get something that looks okay here. I would want to sort of keep an eye out for this margin. I'm not sure exactly what's going on there at the moment, but not so bad, right? If I made this into a 6.6, right, I could put text in here that would flow the entire height of this available of this section. So I have that capacity. So the other way that we've looked at getting content on the page, right, is much closer to all the JavaScript work that we've done. And so this is where we start to see, oh, I have a div ID my chart div, right, and I've got all this other stuff going on, but what I'm going to do, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take all of my header JavaScript, right? I'm going to move it into, sorry, that was unnecessary. I'm going to move it into my head tag here. So I'm going to stick it just right above this CSS. I'm not going to worry about the CSS right now because remember, my CSS is now being handled by my responsive grid system. So what I need to worry about is just making sure that the thing, well, first of all, I need to make sure I bring my chart scripts over. So I'm going to copy this, bring it into my new folder, paste. So now I have a copy of linechartscripts.js. Right, which has all of my other stuff in it. Now, previously, I had written this CSS saying, okay, make sure that the width is this and the height is that. But I don't need that necessarily because really all I need to do is make sure that there is a div whose ID is my chart div. Why? Because that's what my JavaScript is targeting. So if I look at my responsive grid system here, you can see that the class property, right, is being used to do this 4 of 12, but the ID property is available. So I should be able to just put the my chart div in there, right, have this class span 4 of 12, and rather than having to set the width and height explicitly, it should hopefully just kind of fall into place there. Now, I might want to additionally specify just the height of the ID my chart div, right, to make sure that I take up the total available height. But let's see what happens here. So, well, of course we can see that not a whole lot. Oh, there we go. Actually, it did work, which is kind of amazing, right? This is my tiny, tiny little thing. But we do see this is kind of amazing because this is sort of generated what Edward Tufte would call a sparkline by accident because it's just squished into this really, really tiny, tiny, tiny space. Kind of fantastic in a way, but not quite what we're looking for. So now, if I wanted to just affect my chart div, right? If I just wanted to specify the height, right, I could say, you know what, make that height 400 pixels as well. Now this is where the cascading element of cascading style sheets is great, because what's going to happen is the first thing it's going to do is look at the class, and it's going to say, what does the class specify? And in this case, we can tell because there's no default height, right? When we don't put a height in, we just get nothing basically, right? All we get is the height of the text, the actual content. So when I say, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, well, let's look at what's in this CSS, span 4 of 12. And we can actually open that up and take a look. I'm guessing it's going to be maybe in the 12 calls. Yep. So span 10 of 12. So here we have span 4 of 12, and it's giving it a percentage width, which is great. I think there's also some, that's a subclass of column, which is the block, float, and margin, which we could mess with all of this, right? So I mean, this is our copy now. We can do anything we like with it if we want to tweak it a little bit. The defaults are pretty good, so I'll leave those for now. But it doesn't say anything about the height, right? It's just governing the width. So first it looks at the class and says, okay, I understand what height to do. Then the next thing it will do is it will try to match the ID, and it says, does the ID say anything that either augments or overrides what's in the class? So the hierarchy in which it's applied is going to be first class, then ID. And the properties that win out are always going to be the ones that are closest, quote unquote, closest to the element. So in this case, an ID is considered closer because an ID is generally unique on a page, right? So we use classes to define, sort of broad strokes layout elements as we're doing here. And then if we need to override something, tweak something for a particular piece of content, we use that doing the ID. More importantly, or as importantly in this case, right, the fact that this is still called my chart div is how, right, oops, nope, that wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for the JavaScript, right? Remember that my chart div is actually the name of the element that I told Google Visualizations to look for to insert my chart into. So here if I say my chart div and I also set its height to 400 pixels, what I should get is a chart that is also the same height as my map. And again, kind of funky scaling here, a little bit of weird stuff going on. This is not a layout I would recommend. I would recommend you look at other places for this. But you see how we can start to integrate this into this nice layout, and then from this, we can start to do some motion on the page as well, get things moving around a little bit in terms of how many columns we do. It starts to feel a bit like a quote unquote real website. Okay, so that's all great because now we have all the important elements, right? We've actually then just been able to reuse all of the work we've done already. We're loading our Google visualizations. We're loading our chart, we're loading our Fusion Tables map. We've got all of that going, which is great. So now we need to talk about sort of the main piece for today, which is how do we do custom interactions? And what we're going to be looking at in this is we're going to be looking at a couple of functions from the jQuery library. So we're going to be doing those. We're going to be probably adding those in our load gviz space, or maybe a little later on. Maybe we'll actually we'll just create a separate function for it. But so first, what I'm going to do is we're at this case we're going to do an annotated image. So I will see you guys here back in a few minutes with an image inserted on the page, and we will take it from there.